Hello world, and we are back. My name's Kyle Fischl, and this is going to be episode 98 of my poker vlog. For this episode, I cover a session I played 2-5 no limit at Orange City Racing and Card Club. I have a bunch of hands to go over, so we're going to go right into it. First interesting hand. A middle position player opens to $30. There's one call. I call in the cutoff with Queen Jack of Hearts. The button calls, one of the blinds calls, so we're 5 ways to a flop of King 9-7, 2 clubs, 1 heart. When the pre-flop aggressor and another middle position player check to me, I think this is a good opportunity to take the betting lead. I would love to take this pot down right now, but I also think that my specific hand functions pretty good as a semi-bluff. The times I'm called, I can continue on pretty much any heart. I also can hit my gut shot. Based on my position and the way I played the hand, I could easily have pocket 7s, pocket 9s, 7, 9, 8, 10 of clubs. Plenty of hands that I would do this with. This is one of the weakest hands I would decide to pick up the betting lead with, but either way, I'd throw out a bet of $60. Unfortunately for me, the button goes all in for about 600, which is less than ideal. When it folds back to me, yeah, I got caught. I cannot continue.
Right in the kisser. Show that knight who's boss.
So I lay this one down. So a couple hands such as this took me a bit of time to get going. I'm actually into the game for $1,600 at this point, and I finally get to move to a vlogger optimal position at the table. So I'm in middle position with 1 limp to meet. I make it 20 with 5-6 offsuit. Not recommended. This is very loose, but it's a table where a lot of people are just mixing it up, so I'm happy to play a lot of hands. Well, the button, 1 blind, and the limper call, so we're 4 ways to a flop of King 8-6, 2 spades. When it checks to me, I would like to size up here. I have most of the best kings in range. I can still get called by flush draws, which I'm ahead of. And I have backdoor straight possibilities that will hit infrequently the times I am called in behind. So I bet 50. The button is the only caller. The turn is the 9 of diamonds. Kind of an interesting card. It gives me a gut shot straight draw. It does not complete the front door flush draw, and I can still have the best king here all the time. I consider throwing the second barrel here because sometimes I would continue when I gain equity, even though it's the small gut shot equity. But if I get raised, I pretty much have to fold, and I don't really want to give up on this hand just yet. So I think pivoting to a check call against a player in positions. So I decide to check. My opponent checks it back, and when the river is the 5 of spades, even though the front door flush comes through, I'm definitely going to go for value here. I think a decent amount of opponents would pick up the betting lead on the turn if they just had a flush draw with no showdown value. Additionally, I think I could bet small here and fold to a raise at some frequency. When I bet small here, I don't think it gives my opponent a chance to raise as a bluff, as I would play all ace x of spades the exact same way as I played this hand. So this bet's really just targeting single pair kings, for which my opponent does decide to pay off. So it's nice to get some extra value on the river when we play speculative hands and somehow river the winner.
Is it possible to learn this power?
Next hand of note. This one is a slightly better candidate to play. With 1 limp, I make it $25 with King Jack of clubs from middle position. Well, 1 late position player, the big blind, and the limper call as well. So we're going 4 ways to a flop of King 10-4 rainbow. Flopping top pair on a very dry board. Definitely going to c-bet. Get paid by a 10. Weaker kings. Maybe a disbelieving middling pocket pair. So I bet $50. Well, the late position player and the limper call. So we are 3 ways to a turn card, which is the 3 of clubs. Very good turn card for me, facing 2 opponents if one of them for some reason had ace king or king queen. Gaining the backdoor flush draw is a ton of equity. I don't know how many straight draws my opponents can have, as I have the jack of clubs blocker, which is kind of important in this hand. So I don't think I need to go too big with this bet. I decided to bet $110, and to this bet both my opponents fold, so pretty happy with the result. Definitely like throwing the second barrel out when you turn a ton of equity, and it definitely works out on this one. Next interesting hand. With a button straddle, it folds to me. I make it $35 with ace jack offsuit. Well, a late position player decides to go all in for 200, and then it folds back to me. I don't think this particular person would just jam with jacks plus. I just believe my opponent's much more likely to have a weak pocket pair here. So with my 35 already in there, I think this is just a math call and take the 50-50 against weak pocket pairs. So I make the call. The run out does not improve me at all, but my opponent only has ace-8, so my jack kicker will definitely play. We will win a kind of fun one on this one. Next hand of note. An early position player raises to $30. His standard size was just a little higher than usual. But either way, I make the call in middle position with king, queen offsuit. One late position player decides to call, so we are 3 ways to a flop of king 10 3 2 clubs. Well, the early position pre-flop aggressor decides to check to me. This is one of the times where I'll take a stronger hand and decide to check it back for pot control and to strengthen my checking range. So I don't always just check it when I have weak hands. You have to include some strong hands in that one as well. The late position player checks as well, so we're 3 ways to a turn card of the 8 of clubs. When it checks to me a second time, I think as played, I kind of have to check it back. Either opponent could already have a flush, but when I check, the late position player checks behind. The river's the king of diamonds. Pretty phenomenal card for me. But to this card, the early position pre-flop aggressor decides to bet $80. Pretty much a pot-sized bet. Given the way I played the hand, I think this is just has to be a call all the time. My particular opponent in this hand definitely has the ability to bluff, and he often does it if there's been several streets of weakness shown to him. And he's even good enough to just value bet a 10 here. We're definitely very happy to call this one. But on this one, he has ace-5 of clubs. So 2 streets of checking and pot control definitely saved me a bit of money on this one. Next hand of note. An early position player raises to $25. I call a middle position. 2 other late position players call. So we are 4 ways to a flop of 10-6-4 rainbow. I'm definitely very happy with my hand here. Double gutters are so sneaky when they hit. No one ever sees them coming, and they often result in massive wins for the times they do hit.
You didn't see that coming?
Well, on this board, the pre-flop aggressor decides to bet $45. I decide to call. One of the late position players decides to call, and the other decides to fold. So we're actually 3 ways to a turn card of the deuce of spades. One of the better cards I could hope for. Either one of my opponents could c-bet or call with just 2 random overs to the 10, so not being an over is pretty good, I'd say. Obviously, picking up backdoor flush draw is a ton of equity. Not too often am I ever going to go backdoor flush over flush. So my flush draw should be the winner the times that it does hit. And on this card, my opponent decides to slow down and check it to me. I'm not going to let this one check. I have absolutely 0 showdown value, and the times my hands do connect on the river, they'll be very, very disguised. We'll likely be able to make a massive river value bet that gets crying calls. We're definitely going to bet and try to build the size of this pot. I bet $125, but to this bet, both my opponents fold. It is definitely very good and profitable to continue betting when you turn a ton of equity. Next hand of note, and this one is a doozy. An early position player raises to $25. I'm in middle position with ace-king offsuit. Definitely not going to just call this one. The early position player is a very competent pro. Definitely has very balanced ranges at most positions, which can be difficult to play against. So even more reason to 3-bet. There are plenty of weak holdings he can include to his early position opening range. Well, when I 3-bet to 80, one late position player calls and the pre-flop aggressor calls as well. So we're going 3 ways to a 3-bet pot of 5-4, 2 spades. Having the ace of spades makes me a little bit confident, as well as the 4-5. I have backdoor flush possibilities, backdoor straight possibilities, 2 overs, and also on a board where my opponent's likely missed. And since this is my first 3-bet of the entire day, I could easily have aces, kings, queens. All over pairs are possible. I'm definitely going to c-bet on this hand and size up on a lot of turns. So I continue for $100. The late position player decides to fold, but the pre-flop aggressor decides to call. And when the turn is the jack of hearts, this is where the hand gets a little bit interesting. I've seen this particular opponent call 4 bets with hands as weak as 10-8. So it's very possible he could actually just have a 7 here. 6, 7, 5, 6, all extremely possible for this particular person. The fact that I turn it over to the 7, I think is a great candidate to fire the second barrel. Additionally, with the jack, I could get called by hands such as 8, 9, 9, 10 that gain a gut shot, but I'm still actually ahead of, and I can reevaluate based on many different rivers. At this point, I don't really think it's too likely my opponent could have a flush draw. Having the ace blocker eliminates a lot of the flush draw combinations he could possibly have. But either way, on this turn card, I bet $225. I wish I would have sized up a little bit more. It's a little bit small compared to the size of the pot. But when the river is the 7 of clubs, it doesn't really change anything, except for the fact that I absolutely can't triple barrel here.
You can do it! Get that old ass of yours in the end zone! We gotta win this thing!
If my opponent had a 7, he's never folding. If he had some kind of misdraw, he definitely bricked on that 7. So when he checks to me, I check it back, believing I have the losing hand a high majority of the time. But my opponent shows king, queen of spades. So ace high is going to win this one. So very shortly after the ace-king hand, I'm against the same opponent, who is on the button, makes it 25. I'm in the big blind. I look at pocket aces. Definitely going to 3-bet. My opponent had been making it 25 from the button probably 80 to 90% of the time, so he doesn't have to have anything, which would give you more merit towards just calling. But because I 3-bet him only a few minutes ago, and now I'm doing it again and sizing up, I'm hoping it will actually steam him and get him to play back at me. That's why I size up this one to $100. My opponent does not take the bait. He decides to call. And on the flop of ace jack 4 rainbow, there's almost no way I could possibly lose this hand, flopping the absolute world. So against an extremely competent but also aggressive opponent, I definitely want to size down a lot. I'm really hoping that he'll play back at me, either bluff raise or raise with just a jack, or somehow having the case ace. So I bet $50 on the flop. My opponent decides to just call. On the turn 4 of clubs, now it's pretty likely that I'm going to win this hand. So not knowing exactly what hands my opponent could possibly have when I block so much of the board, I decide to check it to him. This time my opponent does take the bait and he bets $125. Now I'm definitely going to raise here for a few reasons. One is I want to have some check raises on the turn in my range. You never really want to c-bet once, and if you check the turn, always check your weak hands and have to check fold, because better opponents are definitely going to take advantage of that and always add the aggression when it looks like you've given up on the turn. So I definitely want to have moves in there that will dissuade people from trying to take aggressive routes and get me to fold winners when I don't have to. Additionally, my opponent's stack size is very important in this hand. He started with about 1,000, so he has about 800 left in his stack. So I definitely want to do 300 now and go for 500 on the river, no matter what it is. Just trying to get good stack to pot ratio, get stacks in. I check raise to $300. My opponent tanks for about a minute, really looks genuinely in pain.
Emotional damage!
Before he eventually decides to fold. So we definitely had a good little run against this particular opponent. And the stack is looking good. In for 1,600. Definitely have a little bit of profit here now, so we're feeling good about that. Before the next hand of note, I'm in the big blind with 8, 9 of clubs. An early position player makes it 25. There's 2 callers. I'm just going to complete playing out of position, suited connectors, plays well multi-way. When the flop is 8, 9 deuce, rainbow, 1 club, I'm very happy with this board. I check as I play pretty much 100% of my hands in flow. I'm really hoping that the pre-flop aggressor decides to put in a c-bet, because this is one of the times where I'll always check raise, either build a pot or take it down now, whichever. But the pre-flop aggressor checks, both other players check, so we are 3 ways to a turn card, which is the 10 of diamonds. Pretty bad card, all things considered. Any one of my opponents could have 6, 7, or 9, 10, or maybe even 10 jack, where they turned a bunch of equity against me. Well, to this card, the pre-flop aggressor decides to bet $60. I'm definitely going to check raise him now, except the other 2 players both call. Now, I don't really feel too comfortable raising when 3 other people have shown interest in the hand and I don't even have the best 2 pair. So I decided to just call this one and reevaluate the river. When the river's the 3 of hearts, I check, preparing to check call against the single decent sized bet. But it actually checks through, and no one really wants to show. So I'll just show 8-9 and take this one down. A final hand of note. I'm in early position. I have king queen offsuit. I raise to $20. Well, similar to all the other hands, I get 4 callers. So we're going 5 ways to a flop of Jack 10 4 rainbow. Definitely gonna see bet this one. 2 overs and open-ended. Feels pretty good even against 4 other opponents. I bet $40. Well, 3 other opponents decide to call this $40, so we're 4 ways to a turn card, which comes the ace of clubs, giving me the absolute nuts.
Here's Johnny.
I decided to check this card because I don't really think my opponents can ever have 2 pair or better. So if they only have 1 pair, the ace is probably kind of scary. If my opponents just have like a jack or a 10, they might fold to 2 barrels when an ace turns. And we definitely don't want my opponents to be able to fold when we have the literal nuts and a hammerlock on the hand. I check, hoping someone will pick up the betting lead and I can raise with some disguised hand strength. But to this ace, it checks all the way through. The river's the deuce of spades. We still have the absolute nuts. Since no one picked up the betting lead, I'm really just trying to value bet either jack or a 10. Hopefully a second pair will call an $80 bet because it's so small. The pot is absolutely massive compared to this bet size. But it turns out no one had much of anything because all 3 opponents believe $80 is too much. And we finish the night with another small win. So for this 2-5 no limit home session, we are into the game for 1600, out of the game for 1836. We played for approximately 8 hours, which equated to $29 an hour or 6 big blinds an hour. Well, the results are not huge, but I will happily take a win when we started $800 in the hole. If you like my content, please consider subscribing. It helps me out a great deal, and I will see you all next week.